Okay. Well, for those of you who are now joining us, either virtually or later, uh, sorry for the delay. We were just talking about technological difficulties for getting Patrice on for the all-night Shavuot teaching that she participated in under the auspices of the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations. We are hoping, but we are not guaranteeing, we are hoping that that was recorded in such a way that if you were unable to join us for that, that you can join later or find it later.
If I that's what I said to somebody last night when we were chatting. I said, if they did not take the opportunity to tape the whole thing, and then even if they charged something for it, so you weren't able to make the live,
Yeah.
but you can get the recording of all these speakers for something like $5. I bet people would pay that.
Yeah.
Because there was a lot of what I thought very good speakers.
Yeah.
Not everybody, but mainly okay speakers.
What, they were like 8 or 9, I think.
It went from
7?
7 to 4 in the morning.
Okay.
So it sort of hit all the time zones in the country.
And in case you're not able to get that for whatever reason, you can still get our Shavuot service and the, how should we put it, the mini drash and teaser for what you did that night through the usual sources.
Was during the regular Shavuot service.
Yes. You can get that through the usual sources that you get our recordings on, either YouTube or on Vimeo on our website. Well, that's a lot of chattering to get things started. Let's talk to God, and then we'll get underway formally for this session. Father, thank you for this opportunity to be here, for those who've joined us both virtually as well as those who are here with us in the room. And we would ask that this be a time of good communication, clarity in interacting on the various subjects and questions that have come in, but stuff that would impact our lives in a way that we would be better equipped to walk with you as well as represent you to those around us and demonstrate your reality in our lives. Thank you. In Yeshua's name. Okay. We've got questions both near and far, so to speak.
We have a grab bag full of questions.
Yeah, we got a grab bag full of questions. And I know you've sent in a question already, Andy. Jessica, do you have any questions, since we always ask those who are here? Okay. Then, one of the questions that got sent in was as follows. I saw the woman who converted to Judaism at Or Chadash. The question is talking about Shabbat service, what, about 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks?
2 weeks ago.
Just 2 weeks ago? Whatever, however many weeks ago. It was a gal who had completed the process of conversion under the auspices of the MJRC, the Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council, and her supervising rabbi, I guess that's what you'd call him, was a good friend of ours, good friend of the synagogue's rabbi, Dr. Michael Schiffman. So at he requested on behalf of the gal that the final welcoming ceremony take place here at the synagogue. So we did that. So that's what this is a reference to. If you want to get all the details of that, then you go back a couple of weeks and look at the recording of that particular service, again, either on Vimeo or YouTube. No, so I saw the woman who converted to Judaism at Or Chadash. Does the UMJC, the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations, that's the association with which our particular synagogue is connected, does it encourage people to convert? All right, I'll stop there because the next part is sort of related, but is in one sense separate. The answer to that question is, does the UMJC encourage people to convert? The answer is by and large no. This particular conversion took place under the Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council, and that is an association of rabbis, 90% of whom rabbis as well as associate members, 90% of whom are associated with the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations. There are a small handful of those who are not. I'm not going to say a whole lot about the Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council, even though I sit on its executive committee. If you want to know more about them, go to their website, ourrabbis.org, and that'll give you some more information about them. The MJRC since its outset about 25 years ago, has always had a very strong commitment to a more traditional form of Messianic Judaism that is in many places, and in fact more traditional than in some parts of the Union. So that's the nature of that particular organization. That particular organization does in fact have a process by which people can undergo conversion. Their particular process is, how should I put it? Not sure I'm fumbling for a good adjective or two for it. The process itself is very traditional in its orientation. It's at least as traditional and weighty as conservative Judaism, and in many cases as Orthodox Judaism. I can recall many, many years ago now, as there were a couple people in the conversion class that we were supervising, and one of the gals, and actually, if I remember right, we were meeting her home. One of the gals, her name was Tony.
I'm going, and who are you speaking?
Tony was a gal who had one Jewish parent. I forget whether it was mother or father. Mm-hmm. But for her first marriage, she was marrying an Orthodox Jewish guy. And in order to marry him, she felt comfortable and he felt comfortable that even though she had a Jewish parent, she would undergo conversion. So she underwent Orthodox Jewish conversion. And she said as she was sitting through our process, she said our process was roughly the equivalent of their process. So that's at that highest standard is this process of conversion through the Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council. That means that those who are associated with the Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council, who are part of the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations, are in favor or are supportive of people converting. The question is asked, does UMJC encourage people to convert? By and large, as I said, the UMJC, at least in its formal statement, does not do so. But even in the MJRC, we do not encourage people to convert. We guide people who are called by God to convert to go through the process. And the process is a somewhat restrictive process. You have to go through a specific interview just before your application is in fact accepted. Then you go through the process itself. Then there's a closing interview. But the point of the initial interview is to make sure that you are coming to convert with the right motivation. And the right motivation is, first of all, that it is in fact a calling that comes directly from God. Number two, an understanding that this particular conversion does not make you more special as far as God's concerned. It does not elevate your spirituality. It does not enhance your closeness to God. Now, I want to be very careful about what I just said. For those of us who practice a more traditional form of Judaism, we do understand that the forms of Judaism are there to enable people to come closer to God. But the very act of becoming a Jew by conversion does not automatically make you closer to God. So that's the distinction that you need to be very clear about. So that's the approach of the MJRC. And you have to you also have to have a recommendation from a couple or three rabbis in order to proceed with the process. Again, because we want to make sure you're coming for the right reason. There's too much out, and feel free to hop in any place there. There are too many people out there since the rise of the Messianic movement some 50 plus years ago, the modern rise of the Messianic movement some 50 plus years ago. There have been people out there who have become either part of our synagogues as non-Jews, or who are parts of what are often called the Hebrew Roots movement, and that's sort of an amalgam of quite a strange variety of things, who feel that if you're going to be truly a follower of God, then you've got to do Jewish stuff. Or next step is to become Jewish. All right. At the MJRC, people who feel that way are not accepted into the conversion process, because that's not the point of conversion. The point of conversion is a calling of God that comes to specific individuals, that they are to be connected to the Jewish community. And again, that does not make anyone better or closer to God. And nor is it required, as in some parts of the Hebrew Roots movement, required of all true believers in the person of Jesus, as they call him. Now let me think if there's something more I wanted to say on that. If that thing is floating.
Okay.
I sort of feel like in Harry Potter, this could get us in some trouble. That special cauldron where you sort of, the thoughts sort of float around.
Oh, yeah, the pensive.
Pensive, thank you, there you go. Anyhow, if you're familiar with that.
Yeah, so in the early 1970s, when modern Messianic Judaism was sort of becoming soup, there were individual congregations at various places throughout the country who all that were developing. Prior to this, Jewish believers went to church. That's just what because there was nothing like a Messianic congregation at all. At that time, those of us who felt like there needed to be something for Jewish believers for a ton of different reasons, but there was a broad scale, I would say broad scale in Christianity in America, at least, let's put it that way, in the 1970s, that the attitude was basically Judaism, it's not bad, but should be avoided. Jewish believers called themselves Hebrew Christians. And when it was first posited that they had been Hebrew Christians since World War I believe, is when they started saying this term. They still continued to go to churches, but they self-identified as Hebrew Christians, which I think was fine for the churches that they were going to, but for the Jewish community at large, they're going, Hebrew is a language.
Not a people, yeah.
And not a people. And this group that frankly we came into what you might consider Jewish missionary work. There were a great number of older people, in other words, older than 40, who were very upset that we did not want to call ourselves Christians anymore. And they were sure it meant that we were going away from the Lord. So from the get-go, there's been everything that was brought up. Well, maybe we should try this. Oh, no, everything will be ruined if you try that. And one of those things, I think, was the concept of can a believer convert formally to Judaism? Once again, not popular, totally spoken against. John and I, who understood that this might be a way that people could, not a mass of people, but individuals could be content with this process, and that they really would be Jewish people. We didn't talk about it. We didn't say it out loud, did we?
No.
And people would come up to me after I wrote the paper on God-fearers, and they would whisper to me, I would like to convert. And I'm going, and this is me going, keep talking, and it was really underserved because it was just not to be permitted. It was not permitted. And the reasons that were given, I believe, were your basic Christian reasons, not anything having to do with Judaism. Would you say that?
I think
that you were, if you chose to convert to Judaism for whatever reason in your personal opinion, you felt you need to do this, that wasn't, it was wrong. I think part of it came from they insisted, these people who didn't know very much of anything, that you were going to give up Yeshua if you converted to Judaism. You had to sign your name on a paper and it said, I no longer believe in Yeshua. It didn't happen then. Maybe in some groups it does now, but all these things that we're piling on is, oh no, this is the worst thing about it. And so we didn't feel it was the end of the world for people. And we also knew a few, as I said, one or two here and there, who would go to a plain old synagogue and convert. And John and I considered that for me too, that I would go to a plain old synagogue and be a member of the class, conversion class, and convert. It didn't work out that way, but we were seriously considering it for me. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay.
So that's some of the background in it. So we have been discussing this topic for almost 50 years. Oh, and one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
So when we came into what was then, these 4 or 5 congregations were just sort of simmering under the surface, and they found out that there was another one across the country. There's another congregation like ours across the country, and so they started sort of making informal, reaching out. Where was I going with that? I'm sure it was very important. I was thinking about the reaching out and the congregations.
It produced the formation of the union.
Yeah, that eventually.
Yeah.
Well, the alliance. Okay, so as a Hebrew Christian, you were at a church. This is in the 70s. Early 70s. You were in a church. You identified as Jewish, but you called yourself a Hebrew Christian. The group that was everybody who had found themselves in a church, who was a Hebrew Christian, ended up in the Hebrew Christian Alliance. It was called the Hebrew Christian Alliance. It's a worldwide organization that still exists. It started right after World War I.
Actually started during World War I.
Started during World War I in England and in Europe. Was the foundation of the Hebrew Christian Alliance. In 1974, I think that's the year.
That the name change occurred?
That the name change occurred.
So.
There were a whole bunch of young people like us who said the name needs to be changed. And as I said, people stood up and yelled. They stood up and yelled at all these crazy young people who didn't want to call themselves Christian anymore. How dare they? They're turning their back on the Lord and blah, 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 blah. And the vote, it was close. Mm-hmm. But at that point, they switched their name to the Messianic Jewish Alliance. That alliance was an individual club. In other words, who joined? If you were a Jewish believer in a church, you could sign up for the Hebrew Christian Alliance. And that was great. John's parents had participated in Philadelphia in the Hebrew Christian Alliance, but it was very much a church-oriented thing. When you had congregations, now you have Messianic congregations. That's a different thing. And the Hebrew Christian Alliance was very iffy on this, unless people in the alliance were running them. But when you came, it's a whole long, sad story, but when the congregational leaders who were at the Messianic Jewish Alliance decided we need an organization just for congregations, because we have different needs, we have different ideas, we need to support each other. There's more and more of us every year. There's a couple more congregations coming up, and we need to be able to meet and plan and get to know each other. And that really threatened the Messianic Jewish Alliance. They were extremely threatened. They wanted everybody to stay in their club, and they were going to have the club, right? Would you say that was fair?
Yeah.
And so, as you might predict, the Messianic Jewish Alliance said you cannot come here if you're a member of this congregational support group. And that's really when the split happened between the Messianic Jewish Alliance and that group that became the UMJC, the Messianic Jewish Congregation. Union of Congregations, a bad split. And there was no talking to each other for years. Even though we had started out pretty cool, and it still is, there's not speaking to each other in a lot of cases. I mean, lip service is given, smiles and nods are given, but there's not complete acceptance, and there's a lot of rivalry. Not so much on the union's part, I don't think, but on the Messianic Jewish Alliance is very threatened by the union still after 40 years. It's crazy. This is the way people go. And with this last point, I'll hand it back to you if you know what you're going to go further on. Down through the years, mainly at churches. So, John and I have to, and have had to speak in churches or go and talk at Bible studies. And so we've had a lot of interaction with plain old Christians and not Messianic Jews. And a lot of people will come, why are you guys all split up? Why don't you have one big group? You should all, there's not that many Jewish believers, and so you should all get together and be one big group so you're not split. And I don't even know what we used to say, but it was obvious to John and I, that's not going to happen. As long as you have a group of people that's saying, you're wrong, and you're ungodly, and you're out of control. And there was always that feeling of you have broken away, and now you're irretrievable. And so that's one of the reasons why not all Jewish believers can meet together and be happy together. I'm trying to be fair. Okay.
All right. For more on what Patrice just shared, this summer, in fact, next month, will be the 45th anniversary of the formation of the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations, or the UMJC. And I was asked to do a session on the origin of the UMJC. So that'll be at our conference in Orlando, third week of July. So that is a commercial. Commercial part 2. Patrice mentioned her chapter on God-fearers. If you've not read the chapter on God-fearers, it's in the Enduring Paradox. You need to read it. It talks about how historically the early followers of Yeshua, who were Gentiles, connected with the Jewish community, the Messianic Jewish community. It's all laid out for you there. That was commercial part 2. Commercial part 3. Enduring Paradox, for those of you who are part of the synagogue, is over here on our book table. Something else that's also here on the book table is something called Voices of Messianic Judaism. A very quick background to that book. Rabbi Daniel Cohen-Sherbach, who used to be a professor at the University of Wales, a Reform rabbi, wrote a book called Messianic Judaism, in which he presented the case for Messianic Judaism in a very favorable fashion and urged the larger Jewish community to recognize Messianic Judaism as one of the branches of Judaism. He spoke at one of our union conferences, and as a result of a get-together with him over a lunch, he suggested the book that ultimately became known as Voices of Messianic Judaism, to deal with a variety of different subjects on which Messianic Jews would either agree or disagree. He wanted to present a spectrum on that. I was asked to write the chapter, or maybe I volunteered to write the chapter on conversion. So if you want the argumentation for the validity of conversion to Judaism, either through Messianic auspices or non-Messianic auspices, you get the book Voices of Messianic Judaism and you read the chapter I wrote. I forget the exact title of the chapter, but it has something to do with conversion. The title has something to do with conversion. All right, now, we threw a lot of different organizations at you. So a quick summary and distinction between the ones that we are connected with. This particular synagogue, as a synagogue, is connected with the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations. That's an association of congregations. This particular rabbi and this particular person, we are both connected as individuals with the Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council, because that's an association of rabbis or Messianic leaders. Okay? So that's an association of leaders, the other is an association of congregations. All right, since we threw both of those at you. So those are the two main ones we're connected with. I also need to mention, there are, and this is from the Pences, there are a couple other reasons why people get converted. And I've encountered a handful of people in each of these particular cases. Number one, how should I put it? They have somewhere in their background a Jewish heritage, however many generations back, and they want to, how should I put it, reconnect with that background in a formal manner, and so they feel that they would like to convert and become formally Jewish.
It's often a reason.
Yes. And the interesting thing is, as the Messianic movement has progressed over these past 50 years, it turns out that a lot of people who've become part of these congregations have, after they've done some historical research and then more recently genealogical research, they have found that they have had legitimate Jewish connections. And they want to now, I'm not quite sure of the proper verb, to fortify that, to clarify that, so they go through the process of conversion to make it clear that they want to be part of the Jewish community and to live and identify as Jews. Again, not to make them more special, not to draw them closer to God.
And it's not something that everybody should do by any means.
No, absolutely not. It's not something that everyone should do by any means. And we've tried to limit the number of those who do it to those who are specifically called or who want to clarify their Jewish status. There are some who do it because they have married a Jewish spouse, and so they want to make that formal identification with Judaism. Okay? Now, I'm going to use this as a bridge to, that's only the first line, and I'm looking at this. There's 10 lines that are part of this particular question. That's only line one.
It requires historical understanding of where this is coming from.
But this is an absolutely vital question as it relates to identity of people, who is what in the family of God, and it also relates to validity of Messianic congregations. Okay? The identity of people who are part of them as Jews or as not Jews. Oh, before I leave it, as is very clear both historically and as should be clear nowadays, although it's not always as clear, in Messianic Jewish congregations, Gentiles are accepted on an equal footing with Jews. They certainly are. Here, from the very outset, we've had both Jews and Gentiles at all leadership levels of this particular congregation. Mm-hmm. And in fact, one of our favorite leaders and cantors, not to diminish the other three cantors that we have, is not Jewish. In fact, he was an Episcopalian altar boy, and that's Richard. And those who've come and either visited or joined this particular synagogue, ours, have often assumed that Richard is Jewish. But as a full-blown God-fearer in the sense of what that chapter talks about, Richard and his family are definitely those. They're excellent examples of those. Those who connected with the Jewish community and, in fact, to some degree or other, took up a Jewish lifestyle. I'm not going to get sidetracked on that because you got to read the chapter on God.
It's a different topic, really.
It's a different topic, really. Related but different. I want to very briefly, because I do discuss him in my chapter, talk about a fellow by the name of Timothy. You may remember him as one of the students of a rabbi by name of Rav Shaul, whom history now knows as the Apostle Paul. Timothy had a Jewish mother and a Jewish grandmother. So most people assume he was Jewish. But if you're going to be a Jew as a male, what is the line of demarcation?
For boys.
For boys. Circumcision. If you're not circumcised, you're not considered Jewish, by and large, and certainly was back in those days. Rav Shaul had Timothy circumcised. Most people, as they read that, think, oh, he went through the physical process of circumcision. Yes, he did, and that wasn't a particularly pleasant process. But in those days, when you went through the process of circumcision, that was the last step, next to the last step, in becoming formally a Jew. In that culture, in that context, Rav Shaul had the Gentile Timothy circumcised to convert to Judaism. Despite the fact that he had a Jewish mama and Jewish grandma, he was not considered part. He had to convert formally to Judaism. Timothy did. Now, who is Timothy? Well, Rav Shaul wrote 2 letters to Timothy. 1st and 2nd Timothy. And Timothy was one of his most productive and well-known students. But he took him and converted him to Judaism. Right? Is that clear? Because most people don't get that because they haven't read it in its context. That means that it is perfectly okay scripturally for a Gentile to convert to Judaism even after Yeshua has been around. I mean, we have the example of Rahab and Ruth, who became part of the Jewish family, as well as others, before Yeshua. But the argument usually is that was okay back then, but since Yeshua, no, you shouldn't do it, or if you do it, you are in some sense diminishing Yeshua or your relationship with Yeshua because you felt you had to convert. Well,
they assume you have to deny Yeshua.
Yeah, well, either that, one or the other. So, Timothy is the primary example that you have of someone in Scriptures who, in fact, he probably was not the only one. A discussion of Acts 15, I think we may have had before and have, in fact, talked about that in those discussions. So Timothy is an example of a fully formed believer in Yeshua converting to Judaism as a follower of Yeshua. Okay, then we move on. Since there are no longer Jew and Gentile, Galatians 3:28, in the Messianic kingdom, why would we convert? Well, now, in part, I have answered that question. If God calls you to convert, if that's a special calling of God by which he wants you to, in that way, identify more fully with the Jewish community, then that's a calling you can and should pursue. We gave you a couple other reasons, either as part of the family, you married a Jewish spouse, or if you want to clarify some of your Jewish heritage that you may have been aware of historically or become aware of genetically, to clarify that situation. I want to comment on, since there's no longer Jew and Gentile. I'm sorry to say, with all due respect to our questioner, that question's wrong. Despite what most people read in Galatians 3:28, there are still Jews and Gentiles. How do we know? Because the guy who wrote Galatians 3:28 wrote a whole bunch of other letters in which he talks to believers, and he calls some of them Jews and he calls some of them Gentiles. In other words, he knew that there were both Jews and Gentiles. The point of Galatians 3, verse 28, is that these people are on an equal footing. And then he goes on to say, and most people stop at Jews and Gentiles, And I love the fact that they do, because it goes on to say there's neither male nor female, slave nor free. Now, in the book of Philemon, Rav Shaul made it a strong point that despite what he said in 1 Corinthians 7, that if you were called as a slave, then that's fine, you're okay as a slave. You're still on equal status in God's family with those who are free. But in Philemon, he wrote to this gentleman by the name of Philemon about a fellow by the name of Onesimus. If I remember right, you did a drash on that
For Sukkot.
for Sukkot.
When we lived in Chicago.
When we lived in Chicago, and it was in the sukkah. We actually,
yes.
unlike here, we did the whole service in the sukkah.
Yes, and we had to wear our winter coats and
It was
winter
cold.
hats and mittens, and we froze. But other than that,
Anyhow, so it was an excellent drash on Philemon. Philemon is told he's a brother to his slave Onesimus, and he should set Onesimus free. Now, Rav Shaul said that specifically to Philemon. He did not go out through the Roman Empire and tell the Romans they should free all their slaves. If you understood the message of Yeshua, that would be the result, but that's not what he was speaking about. So, great difference between slaves and free. But in the family of God, he says, there is not that difference. In the Roman Empire, there certainly was. And in Philemon, he argues that should be, in fact, slavery should be terminated. But he understood full well that there were still going to be slaves and free people within the family of God, and regardless of how they were treated outside the family of God, they were to be treated as equal status. Fair enough? Now we get into the fun one. Neither male nor female. It is quite clear that being part of the family of God does not abolish the difference between men and women, any more than between slaves and free, and therefore not any more nor in any way between Jews and Gentiles. The rabbi in his letters made the distinction between Jews and Gentiles. The rabbi in his letters talked to both men and women. The rabbi in his letters talked to both slave and free and had specific instructions for each as to how they should function in their particular communities. Now, lest this get misunderstood in any way possible, I want to be very crystal clear on this. The distinction between men and women has nothing to do with who should be a leader in a family or in a congregation. Period, exclamation, in bold and underlined. Fair enough? If you read the text carefully, you will find that is the situation. And by the way, that is the way in which we here in this particular synagogue have operated since the outset. We have always had men and women in our leadership at all levels and of equal status. Okay? Now, I know that's a big issue in some circles.
whether you're union or alliance.
Yes.
That's a big bugaboo for a lot of people.
And in fact, this summer, if all goes well, the union will approve a statement of change of policy in that it will ordain women to be rabbis. If it passes, you can pray that it does. From its outset, the Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council, the MJRC, has always been there to ordain women who've gone through the process in the same way that the men have gone through the process. Okay? So, that's paragraph 1. Now these interconnect. Romans 2:29, no person is a Jew who is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision of the heart, by the Spirit, not by the written code. Such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God. Great. It's helpful to understand what's going on here, however. Number 1, circumcision by the heart. That is a New Testament concept. It's after the resurrection of Jesus. No, people, it's not. Deuteronomy 30 talks about God circumcising the heart, all the way back to the beginning, to the books of the Torah. So circumcision of the heart does not apply just to those who become part of the family of God after Yeshua and because of Yeshua.
Post Yeshua.
Post Yeshua, okay? It's been around since the beginning. Romans 1, 2, and 3 are part of the rabbi's argument. I'm not going to unwrap it for you totally, but very briefly. He talks about, first of all, the status of the world at large, mainly talking about the non-Jewish world. How do they relate to God? Then he talks about Jews and how Jews relate or should relate to God. And then he brings his argument to a conclusion in chapters 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 as to what all that means. Okay? Romans chapter 2, second half of Romans chapter 2 is speaking to Jewish people, not to Gentiles. I'll say it again. It's speaking to Jewish people, not to Gentiles. He's not saying to Gentiles, a person is a Jew is one inwardly, and circumcision is circumcision in heart. He's not addressing that to Gentiles. Question, is he addressing that to Gentiles? Answer, no, he's not addressing it to Gentiles. I made a big thing out of that because most people don't get it, and because they don't get it, they get caught up in the wrong space. He's simply saying to Jews, look, do not parade around your Judaism. Yeshua had made reference to this in some of his teachings, and in fact in the parables. The rabbis also spoke about this, not in contrast to Yeshua, but Yeshua was speaking just the same way the rabbis did, in the sense of don't be hypocritical. What you're doing can't just be on the outside, it's got to be internal. Okay, that's what he's talking about here. He says the issue at the heart of Judaism is the heart of the Jew. And at the heart of the Jew, there should be circumcision. By the way, we didn't do it this week, but a couple weeks ago, and we will probably do it again. Yes, we will definitely include it in the Shabbat service in 2 weeks. We will do the abridged and summary portions of the Amidah that we do on Shabbat. The opening line, I wish I could remember it in English. There it is. Direct our hearts to your worship. Sounds great, doesn't it? The opening line in Hebrew says, circumcise our hearts. We have prayed this as Jews for generations and for centuries because we understood the reality that God is the one who circumcises our hearts, and it's been that way since the beginning, since at least the book of Deuteronomy. In other words, since the beginning of the Torah itself. Okay. And so, such a person's praise is not from other people, but from God, because they are doing it as we commit ourselves to doing it when we say, I will love the Lord my God with all my heart, with all my life, with all my strength. Okay? More could be said about that, but I think that's probably enough on that particular part. Romans 9, verses 7 to 8. Nor because they are his descendants are they all Abraham's children. On the contrary, it's through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned. In other words, it's not the children by physical descent who are God's children, but it's the children of the promise who are regarded as Abraham's offspring. And all kinds of interesting teachings there. This is, in a sense, building on what he laid the foundation for in Romans chapter 2. How do we know? Because he'd already written Romans chapter 2, because the Romans had already read Romans chapter 2 by the time they get to Romans chapter 9. And by the way, in those days, they used to read the whole thing all at once. We don't have time in our services to pull that off anymore, unless it's Shavuot.
You'd be up all night.
Then you'd be up all night.
Get through Romans.
Yeah. Anyhow. And Romans is by no means the longest book in the Newer Testament.
No. But it is heavy.
But it is heavy.
It's really heavy.
Now, Abraham's descendants, and through Isaac shall their offspring be called. What's he referring to? He's talking about he's talking first of all historically about the fact that Abraham had more than one son. He had Isaac and Ishmael. And the covenant promises, God said, would go through Isaac. Okay. That means those who are descendants of Ishmael, and this has to do with a good chunk of the Arab population, are descendants of Abraham. They are children of Abraham, but not through Isaac. The promises come through Isaac. Does that make them less the children of Abraham? But guess what? Isaac had 2 kids, at least. They're mentioned. Esau and Jacob. That means that Abraham's descendants through Isaac, not all of Abraham's descendants through Isaac, are the ones that promise. The people who read this verse understood that as well. But if you don't understand what the verse is saying, you would be drawn to that conclusion. The descendants of Esau interacted with the descendants of Ishmael, and they're part of that larger group of people. So, the true descendants of Abraham are the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that's why God is so frequently described as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Those are the true descendants. Those are the children of the promise. Now, there's always been the opportunity for those who are not the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob to become connected to the Jewish community and to become part of the promise. Please remember that all the way back in Genesis chapter 12, God said to Abraham, through you and your descendants, all nations will be blessed. That means you can get to be part of the, you can get to participate in the blessing even if you're not Jewish. That's why you don't have to become Jewish in order to participate in the blessing. To get back to the first part of this question. That's all theological background for this. Okay, where was I going with that? Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Yes, down through the years, you could always become part of the Jewish community. We always talked about that. There was either formal or informal conversion. We talked about Rahab, and we read about Ruth, or Patrice talked about Ruth, and down through the ages, that has continued. And in the time of Yeshua, the late Second Temple period, in fact, Yeshua reflects on this, there was a fairly significant movement of what was often called proselytization that Yeshua refers to, largely through Pharisaic circles, where they went around and enabled Gentiles to become Jews through the process of conversion, or what often is called proselytization. We no longer use that term proselytization frequently because it often has a negative impact. It's conversion.
I would say that nowadays it always has a negative impact.
So we talk about conversion. Okay, children of promise. Then, the last part, and all this builds to this last part. I thought these scriptures meant that I was a Jew inwardly. I've been taught that I cannot be a Jew, and it's an insult for me to claim it. How does all this work? Now that we've gone through all the rest of this, I think we can better answer what comes at the very end, which is a deeply personal question. And here's the answer, if you haven't already figured it out. If you are a follower of Yeshua, you are fully a member of the family of God, as is. You don't have to become a Jew to become closer to God or a better part of the family of God. But that does not make you a Jew inwardly. The inward Jew of Romans chapter 2 is talking to a Jewish person, and to the Jewish person, the rabbi is saying, what you're doing outwardly has to take place inwardly as well if it's going to be fully legitimate. All right? That's who a Jew inwardly is. A Jew inwardly is a Jew who not only follows God by way of what they do, but the way in which they live and react and think and love and reach out to other people. All right? It would be wrong, and I'm not sure that the questioner is saying this at all, it would be wrong for a Gentile to claim that they are a Jew, inwardly or otherwise, because that's just simply not true. It's certainly not. It would be considered somewhat of an insult to the larger community for those who are not Jews to claim to be Jews if they haven't gone through the process of conversion. If they've gone through the process of conversion, the rabbis down through the centuries have said this loud and clear. Once a person has converted to Judaism, you are never, ever to remind them that they are a convert. They're to be considered totally and fully a Jew. Because the rabbis say, you became a Jew not at all of your own volition. It's by an accident of birth. They became a Jew by choice. And at some level, that's to be considered even higher. That isn't always the way it plays out in the larger Jewish community, but that's how the larger Jewish community teaches that it should be played out. Okay. Take a deep breath. There we go. Bottom line is this. In Messianic Jewish congregations, Gentiles should be fully recognized on an equal, on a par, at an equal level with Jews. Fully throughout the congregation. Some Gentiles who become part of Messianic synagogues may in turn be called by God specifically to convert and to identify as a Jew, rather than as a non-Jewish follower of the Jewish Messiah. Or as some people call themselves, Messianic Gentiles, and that's fine. You got to define that, but it's still fine. Is that clear? Any questions? We spent a long time on it, but it's a question that deserves to have a long time spent.
Because we never do. We never
We
talk
never
about
do.
it, and because our habit has been since the beginning to keep it on the down low. And no, we're not ashamed of how we feel. We're not trying to bring it up to cause division or say they're bad and we're good.
Yeah.
But also with this Jewish Gentile in the congregation, all right, this is my opinion.
Go.
It's not his opinion. There are some Messianic Jewish congregations that we know of that are very prejudiced against Gentiles.
Yeah.
And they really don't want Gentiles going to their congregation, which to me is hideous. Here's what Gentile believers should not do. Go into a Messianic congregation and tell the Jewish members to do stuff that they, as Gentiles, feel comfortable with. That's what should not happen. If Gentiles want to come and participate and support what's going on
And
be part of it and spend time, that's great, wonderful, good. But if Gentiles want to come to the congregation, well, you don't do this right, and you have to change this, and no, this is not right, and we can't do that Jewish thing because it's terrible. No, then no, you can't come. And unfortunately, historically, what have Jewish believers been taught in churches? Well, that Jewish opinion is wrong, and that Jewish is wrong, and this is wrong. This Jewish thing is wrong, and the law is wrong, and we can't be under the law, and so I think part of the sensitivity maybe of these particular congregations is that they're concerned that would happen. But in our experience here with our congregation, well, actually either congregation that we've been associated with, that has not happened. Or if there was somebody saying, well, can we do this? And so our answer is, do they do it when you go to the synagogue down the street? Is that the way they act in that synagogue? If it isn't, then guess what? I don't think we're going to want to do it. Because we're trying to feed and attract Jewish people, not every single person who walks down the street.
Okay, let me build on that because it popped into my mind because we've had this discussion over the last couple of days.
Mm-hmm.
Let me reinforce what Patrice just said. We will accept any Gentile who wants to commit themselves to this particular synagogue. Unless they're coming here, and we've had several in our history.
Yeah.
Unless they're coming here to teach us what we should do and shouldn't do and change who we are and the way in which we function. In that case, what our response to them is simply this. Well, thank you for sharing your convictions with us, but I think you will be far more at home in another congregation than in our particular synagogue.
And in Florida, there are Bible-believing congregations everywhere. It's just, they're all, like within, half a mile from here, there might be 10 that people could go to and it would be just fine. So it's not like, they're going to be out in the street with no place to go. Mm-hmm. In fact, one of our friends, if he got in a conversation after services with a visitor who was a Gentile, that would say something like, well, how come you do this? he would basically invite them to go to a very, very wonderful Gentile congregation, and there's dozens within this zip code. So you can find one very fast. And you'll enjoy it much more there than you will with us, because we are called to do something different.
Now, building further on something Patrice said, along those same lines.
You're blaming it on me.
Yep. If it's not done, by and large, in synagogues around the world, more likely because we are here in the United States, synagogues in the United States, you will find that we are not likely to do it here. I'm going to give you 2 examples. No, I just lost the second example. Oh, yes, I just remembered it. If you go to a traditional synagogue, here's 2 things you will not find. You will find this in Messianic synagogues. So our commitment is different here.
At our synagogue.
At our particular synagogue, and we're not the only ones. If you go to a synagogue, and we really enjoy watching the rebroadcasts on Friday nights of what is a Reform synagogue. Is it in Manhattan?
Yes.
In Manhattan. And they're a Reform synagogue that's basically conservative in their approach.
I was shocked at how much of the liturgy that we do here at our congregation I can sing along with, because or it's a different tune, but we know those words.
They are very liturgically and traditionally connected, more so than some Reform synagogues.
We have one Jewish channel on our cable, and so this is the channel you can see several different kinds of synagogues having services, and you can watch them.
My point is this: if you look at those services, and we enjoy their services thoroughly, if you look at those services, here's 2 things you will not find done in traditional synagogues. Number 1, dancing. We, as Jews, we are good dancers. And Patrice and I thoroughly enjoy dancing. And we've been to many weddings, not so many more recently, but many weddings where
parties.
But my point was, we would be the last ones to leave the wedding, as we were with in our own wedding, because we would be dancing. But we don't dance in the synagogue, except on Simchat Torah, because then the tradition is to dance with the Torah as part or after the service. But we don't dance in this particular synagogue, because dancing is not done as part of a synagogue worship in the larger Jewish community. Another thing we don't do, and this is rampant throughout the Messianic Jewish movement, when we sing, we do not automatically stand.
I can't figure it out. I don't understand why that happens. But we think it comes from Christian backgrounds.
Oh, it definitely does. And look, we're not saying that it's wrong to dance in a service or to stand during singing. We simply are saying that's not Jewish, and we happen to be a Jewish synagogue, so we don't do it here. Okay?
You want to go somewhere else and do it, it's
That's
fine.
What we do as Jews in a synagogue is we stand during the Amidah. Why? Because it's called the standing prayer. We stand during other parts of the service. Why? Because it's traditional at those times to effectively stand before God. So at the Torah reading. So at the Shema. And for those of you who've been to our services, you will recall that we make a very clear distinction as part of our service. And that is, after the Torah is read, you're invited to sit down, because now you've heard the Word of God. You sit down during the translation and any reflections on the passage. Why? So as to make sure no one unconsciously misunderstands that either the translation or the explanation is equivalent to the actual reading of the Word of God. The Word of God is what we have read. When you go to translate it, you're getting one step removed. That doesn't mean the translation is not accurate, but we acknowledge the fact that the words that God gave are the words that we've just now read from the Torah. Now you get to sit down, you get to hear the translation and some reflections on it. So there are reasons for standing in the synagogue, and there are times when we don't stand in the synagogue.
And they're both fine.
And they're both fine. And it's if people want to do it elsewhere, that's their business. but because we consider ourselves a Messianic Jewish synagogue, we will do Jewish things as part of our synagogue service. So, and it isn't just the Jews who do it in our synagogue; it's the Jews and the Gentiles. One of the interesting things is, as you have said this to many people who come to our synagogue, is everybody here Jewish? And you say no. Well, who's Jewish and who's not? Patrice never answers the question.
I say, well, can you point out a couple people you think are Jewish? They always get it wrong. They always get it wrong. And so we have, in the Messianic movement, there are certain Jewish people who I think they would rather have all DNA Jews in their congregations, and they don't really want any Gentile DNA people in their congregation. Whereas I would say, and the reason they give, at least on the surface, is that, well, if we have Jewish visitors and then they find out that we have a lot of Gentiles, then they won't respect us and they won't accept us as Jewish. At least that's been what they've said now for 45 years. And my response would be, I would rather have 50 Gentile DNA believers who were there and thrilled and happy and gratefully responding and worshiping in Jewish ways than have one DNA pure Jew there who says, well, Christians are really right and we should all be at a Christian church. I'd much rather have the Gentiles who are backing it, who are loving it, rather than somebody who's racially pure Jewish, who does not understand the calling to remain Jewish as a believer. And I will yell at people who give me any other kind of stuff than that, because when I've seen Jewish people visiting, remember, these are the people we're trying to impress with how Jewish we are. And I say, pick out, who do you think, look around, who do you think is Jewish? And they always point to Gentile. They never get it right. But, so I really think that if we're all acting in one accord, in agreement and in joy and happiness and honor, frankly, I'd rather have 10 Gentiles than one who is not along with the program and who just denigrates it and criticizes it all the time and would be much happier in a church. Please, go to a church where you'll be happy. That would be great.
Yeah. If you're going to be part of a Messianic Jewish synagogue, you need to be committed to a Jewish, at least in part, if not fully, committed to a Jewish way of life, and certainly fully committed to a Jewish way of worship if you're going to be part of our synagogue. Now, building on what Patrice just said, and then I'm going to do a quick aside. I can't tell you how often people have come to our synagogue, particularly when Richard has been canting, and they'll come up to Richard and assume, and I'm now talking about Israelis, I'm talking about cantors who visited us, and assume from the get-go that Richard's Jewish. Richard never claims to be Jewish. He's never considered himself Jewish.
He's Irish.
He's Irish. And so that's just an example of what Patrice just said. Because that was his commitment, his family's commitment as God-fearers to a Jewish way of life. There are, in our synagogue, a small handful of converts to Judaism. I will not tell you who they are, and most people don't know who is and who isn't. Why? Because
not supposed to talk about it afterwards.
That's exactly right. So, like I said, I don't think the people who are part of the synagogue, most of them do not know who these people are, who are converts. Okay. Conclude near where I began, or where we began, and we need to conclude as I'm looking at it.
Yeah, it's...
Yeah. But I thought we may not get...
No, this is a good topic. I really think this is worth chatting about, and at least
Oh.
you'll understand us better. So.
It's important to the Messianic movement. I think it's important in the eyes of God. It's important because in Jerusalem they had a whole council on this particular issue. It was called the Jerusalem Council of Acts 15.
And that's not taught correctly, so people
Yeah.
get very confused about
And
what they're
that's-
saying.
Yeah, that gets all screwed up. It is truly important, so it's well worth the time. We could have gone longer on it, but I think we've done more than we need to it. We've done it all that we need to at this particular
We've done enough to get us kicked out of most reputable places. So.
Yeah. So, I will say this, and it's a commercial, but it's important. If you want to follow up on this, you're going to need to read 2 chapters. Patrice's chapter on modern-day God-fearers in the Enduring Paradox. My chapter on the validity of conversion in Voices of Messianic Judaism. Feel free to do that by way of follow-up. Okay. Any questions either? I see from you, Barbara, since you're on the monitor, or from Jesse or Andy, who are here in front of us.
Well, if you think of any,
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. That really answered a lot of my questions and helped clarify a lot of things for me, because Gentiles were not appreciated in the congregation that I was in. Every time the word Gentile was said, it was, "You Gentiles."
Yeah.
It was always disparaged.
wrong.
Women were not to do the things that men, and if we had to take a role because there weren't enough men, then we were supposed to step away if a man was willing to step forward and do that particular task. So there's been a lot of confusion on my part as to, where do I stand with all of this?
Yeah.
I appreciate very much you clarifying that.
You betcha.
well, you've heard we're way out on a limb with some of these topics, but it's okay.
Now, as it turns out, on that last topic, a good friend of ours who, along with his wife, have spoken in this particular Messianic synagogue, in fact, in this particular room many years ago. The wife just this past year retired as executive director of the Union of Messianic Jewish Congregations. As it turns out, the husband for the last couple of years has been president of the Messianic Jewish Rabbinic Council. So they know whereof they speak. However, Joshua wrote an excellent paper on the role of women in Judaism and in Messianic Judaism. If you are at all interested in that, it's excellent on that subject. A former fellow student of mine in my seminary days, Philip Payne, wrote a book. I'm guessing it's like 8 or 9 years ago now, maybe even more.
Oh, I think it's about 15, really.
Okay, somewhere between 8 or 9 and 15.
I think it's in the 21st century.
Yes,
however.
it was the 21st century. He wrote a book on the subject of men and women and their roles in the Bible.
It's only this thick, 4 inches thick.
When he wrote it, I congratulate Philip Payne, Payne. I think it's United in Christ, male and female. Or maybe it's male and female united in Christ. Either way. And I said, so, Phil, great work. He said, yeah, it took me a while because I had to condense all the work I had done. His condensation of all the work that he's done is 500 pages. So if you want, Joshua's paper is more like 25 or 30 pages, but if you want something even longer, Philip is not doing it from a Jewish background, whereas Joshua is. If you want to go through it in more detail in that subject, there you go. So we've given you bibliography, we've given you homework, we've given you hopefully some answers, and now we will give you some further encouragement, in a way. Stay tuned as to when the next Stump the Stars is going to be, because we're now into the summer, and we will go on to a summer schedule. We will let you know. There's a possibility we might do one the first week of July. There's a possibility we may not do any till August. We will let you know. Here's how you will know. If you are receiving the weekly invitations to the synagogue,
The the service.
To the service, yep. By
Either
email.
on YouTube or, it's going to be an email, and then you can catch it on either Vimeo or YouTube. Got it.
If you get the invites by email, or if you get the synagogue newsletter, also by email or by mail, it will give you the schedule. So stay tuned. If you get the newsletter can always be amended by the weekly announcements. So keep track of both. That being said, I think we've done our job, our duty. Thank you for your patience. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your attention. And we've got some interesting questions
We didn't get to it tonight.
still in the folder. Just to get you tuned up, we have a question that relates to the subject of hell or heaven and hell. We got a question on the book of Revelation and end time stuff that we have yet to answer that have come in, faithfully sent in. So those are still in the hopper for future weeks, whenever those future weeks are going to occur.
Yeah, a lot of topics where John and I will get kicked out of every place we belong to. It'd be great.
Oh, and
We'll
we
enjoy that.
And just in case you're wondering, some that we've already dealt with, even before tonight, would get us kicked out of some places. And
So keep it on the down low.
so if you're still around, we're grateful. Hopefully, we've not turned off too many people by being honest and upfront.
I think they are dying to know what we'd get in trouble for. So
I'm not going to leak that out. If you really want to know, text or email. All right. With that being said, would you close for us in prayer?
Avinu Malchenu, our Father and our King, you are a great God, and it is a privilege to serve you. We thank you and praise you that we have questions, and when we look to you, we can start our search of answers. We can find satisfying teachings. We trust that you will provide us with what we need as we walk along our way, and help us to always learn to trust you more deeply every day. B'Shem Yeshua Meshachenu, in the name of Yeshua, our Messiah. Amen.
Amen. And Shavua Tov. Have a great week.
Shavua Tov. Look forward to seeing you Tuesday.
Yeah, is it this Tuesday?
I think you're
Or
right.
I
next-
think so.
I
No,
better
I
get
thi-
it together then, huh?
In case you're wondering what that's all about, that's the next
Our Hebrew
Hebrew
class.
class.
Hebrew.
Hebrew
I've
brush
been
up
working
class.
on, I was hoping I'd have it finished before Tuesday, but I'm not. I'm compiling a dictionary of all of the pieces and parts of a dictionary that are in those three books, the primer, book 1 and book 2.
Nice.
Because you know how sometimes you have to go to the boards you're supposed to already know, and then sometimes it's in them alone, and sometimes it's not even there, it's in the story. And so I'm
Yeah.
pulling all of that together
Nice.
to make a consolidated dictionary.
Very nice. Wow.
So I will email that to you, and
Okay.
you can give it to people if you want, whatever.
Or
But
yeah, or
it's
we can
helping
send
me
it out
keep
to the
my
class.
To the class,
vocabulary.
yeah.
That'd be super. Okay, extra credit for you, Bart.